Okay, just going to have a little look at this clip from my film Silent Killers. David Clayton here is talking about a case on the Severn Estuary. Now, what's interesting about this case is the field. There were 16 sheep mutilated, 40 injured, and the field, one side of it was backed onto the Severn Estuary, the other side was a railway line, and the other two sides were adjacent fields. So there was no either access by road or foot. It was a very inaccessible field, and apparently it was pouring down with rain. Even the farmer said he wouldn't have liked to have been out on that evening. So it's about a 4-minute clip.
There's reports initially of 40 injured animals, 16 dead. This happened on...
And the location is on the Severn Estuary, on the Forest of Dean side. Right. So the RSPCA attended, apparently, a big cat expert, a fellow called Danny Bamping from the British Big Cat Society, who declared, so the farmer told me, to the TV camera people, crew who were there, that it was not the work of big cats, and he disappeared. The RSPCA were mystified and were more interested in making a plug for the public watching the TV news to get funds for the RSPCA, which is what they do. So the farmer was absolutely fuming about it because he's lost all his animals with no real explanation. So the CID came back in, we happened to meet two of them, and a vet from a practice in Chepstow, a lady called Jane Glover Hill, appeared, armed with a big knife, to detach the heads of 4 of the animals and take a whole one, which I helped her in the car boot with, back to the veterinary practice to conduct some radiography on the heads to look for evidence of lead shot.
Right. And was there any evidence of lead shot?
No, absolutely none at all. Clean as a whistle.
And did these have any of the mutilation signs? Any of the 14?
No, yes, in a sense. When I heard of this, I rang the TV people in Bristol, who gave me the name of the farmer. So I rang him, said I'm in Manchester, 200 miles odd away, and said, did any of the animals in this big heap on his tractor have a jaw strip? Yeah. And he said, oh yes, I think you're right, they did. So I said, can you go and check to see if the tongue is missing? Right. So he said, oh, okay. So he put the phone down, and after about, I don't know, half an hour, he came back on the phone to me and said, absolutely amazed, he said, you're right, the tongue's missing. So he thought, how do I know, 200 miles away, I haven't clapped eyes on these animals, know that the tongue was missing, you know, because you've got to force the jaw open to see that, because rigor mortis starts to set in, which makes it hard to open the jaw. So he was clearly intrigued, so that was enough. She invited me and Robert to go back with him to Chepstow before we headed back up north, while they did some of the radiography. So, and that proved that firearms were not used categorically. But she found some very interesting wounds. This photograph with the head detached, Jane Glover Hill discovered, with dissection I guess eventually, that these 2 holes were in the side of the head, a bit similar to the lamb from Shropshire, but deeper, within the bigger hole. Right. And she found they seemed to line up. And she actually passed an implement through from one side to the other, which was a knitting needle actually, which she suggested a clamping device had been forcibly, and a lot of force, she said, would have been applied to press these 2 appeared to be blind holes, but diametrically opposite each side of the head. And then this had missed the top of the brain that came out the other side. But that clearly was not done by a bullet. The main thrust of it was to eliminate firearms. And that's really all they were interested in doing. That was the veterinary practice's brief, to eliminate the firearms. And once that was done, the police lost interest. The case was closed. So nobody had any answer to it, basically.
Okay, and that's quite often what happens in these cases. You know, the police aren't interested. As long as there's no firearms used, they go away. The big cat guy said, well, it's not big cats, I'm not interested. The RSPCA just made a plug for their funds. They weren't interested. So they had no answer to it. And the holes in that sheep's head, it had almost looked like they'd been drilled into the skull, 3/4 of an inch diameter, and then another smaller hole inside that hole. And provably, they were not done by firearms. Okay, I mentioned that the nature of these attacks is very, very covert. No one's ever been seen, caught, or shot carrying them out. And I just want to read a couple of extracts to try and shed some light on this covert side to it. This is from Tony Dodd's book, who, like I said, is an ex-police sergeant in North Yorkshire. Some of the farmers in the area who lost stock reported these unnatural deaths to the Ministry of Agriculture, and they were visited by inspectors from the government agency. But at no time were they given an explanation for what was happening, nor did they find their official visitors helpful or communicative about a problem that was affecting their livelihoods. In fact, they found these shadowy figures so obstructive they simply do not report the mysterious deaths anymore. Cedar heard from one of his contacts that small mutilated animals were taken to the Ministry of Agriculture depot, where they were sealed in plastic containers and sent abroad. Unfortunately, he does not know where they went. Determined to get to the bottom of what was going on and protect their livestock, the farmers arranged a vigil at one field between Scarborough and Whitby, where a spate of mutilations had occurred. They hired infrared cameras, which would be triggered by movement in the field. The sensors were rigged so they would record any movement above the height of the sheep, so that they would not be fired by the sheep moving around in the field. Armed with shotguns, a group of farmers spent the night in the open field in the open next to the field. The cameras flashed 3 times, but the farmers neither saw nor heard anything. The following morning, however, they found another mutilated lamb only yards from their observation point, and 2 more at the other side of the field. There had been no sound of disturbance in the flock during the night, and again the mutilations were surgically precise and bloodless, each animal having a small, neat hole in the forehead and its rectum cored out. When the films were developed, they showed only a black background with a small white cloud in the centre. So there's something very strange going on there. And again, in Timothy Good's book, this is from a case in Colorado. At about 17:30 on the 13th of September 1994, during a wave of livestock mutilations in New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, Larry Gardia was checking a herd of cattle belonging to Estevan Sanchez in Luna Canyon near Las Vegas, northeast New Mexico, when he heard a loud, dull hum like a transformer or the sound an arc welder makes. The cows began running away from the noise, but Gardia noticed that 3 cows appeared to be pulled by an invisible beam towards the sound. They were struggling and bawling and were pulled through the trees, said Gardia. I shot at the beam with a 30.6 rifle and the hum stopped and the cows stopped bawling. 1 cow was found dead and mutilated, another injured and another missing. Frightened, Gardia returned to the ranch house and reported the incident to the sheriff's department. Greg Lumbach, Mora County Sheriff's deputy, accompanied Gardia to the area where the incident occurred and examined the dead cow. Its jaw appeared to be skinned on the right side, and its tongue, anus, and reproductive organs had been removed. So again, that's just showing you that there's something very peculiar going on here, something capable of carrying out these incidents invisibly. And this would explain why no one's ever seen them, being perpetrated. Okay, now a very controversial question that might come into your head when you're listening to all of this is, has there been any cases reported of this happening to human beings? Well, the answer is yes. In 1988, there was a case that came to light, and the photographs I'm going to show you are a little bit gory. They're of a man who has a jaw strip, and he has some of the small holes in his body through which organs were removed. These are police photographs, and I do have a report that accompanies them if anyone wants to come and have a read of it. Now, I'll just whiz through them. So there we see the jaw flesh stripped. There's a hole in his right arm where muscle material was removed through that hole. There's a hole in the side of his head here where his brain was removed. And again, you can see there in his stomach area, organs were removed from his stomach. He had the rectal core, which is the same as the sheep and cattle experience, And you can see the hole in his stomach here and in his leg, and his internal organs were removed through those small holes. And Tony Fremont, the pathologist working for the APFU, and he's a human pathologist, he said, "I don't see how we can do this," when he looked at those photographs. Okay, now, that's not the only case, because there's been cases in the United Kingdom. And perhaps this is the reason behind a cover-up, the fact that it has been known to happen to humans in the UK. Now, I mentioned Tony Dodd before, who was a sergeant serving in North Yorkshire. And he became sort of a contact point for mutilation cases. And before he died, he told David Caton about 3 cases that he knew of from his position in the police. And one was in Dalby Forest. And apparently what happened was, over a period of a few weeks, there was 6 or 7 mutilated bodies appeared in the same field in Dalby Forest. All of the hair was missing from those bodies, and they had some of the classic mutilation injuries. And apparently some of this leaked out, the information. So a cover story was given to the press that someone was putting mannequin dummies into this field. That was the story given to the press, but they were actually real bodies. And what Tony says happens in these cases is they don't get reported as murders or deaths. They're basically, so all those people who were found in Dalby Forest are just on the missing persons register, because as soon as you let the family members know that the body's dead, then they want to see it, then they want it examined, and then huge questions of massive significance are then start to be asked, and that they don't want that to happen. And Tony Dodd spoke of another case in Brecon Beacon area where a family of 4 were found laid out by the side of their vehicle, 4x4, and another case in Staffordshire with an 8-year-old girl found with mutilation injuries. Now, when I made Silent Killers film, somebody who watched the film rang me up and said, "Well, Richard, why are you making films about stupid animal mutilation? Why don't you make it about the real story, human mutilation?" I said, well, what do you know? And what he said to me was that in 1997, he was very much into UFOs, and he knew that there had been a lot of UFO sightings in the Brecon Beacon area in South Wales. So he put some notices up around the Brecon Beacon saying, "Have you seen any UFOs?" This guy rings him up, says, "I'd like to speak to you about your UFO appeal." So he meets up with him. This guy turns out to be from Special Forces, SAS, and he told him that his job was to cover up incidents of human mutilations that they'd found on Brecon Beacon. So basically his job was, he'd be in a helicopter, they'd get notice that there was a mutilated body found, the helicopter would come down, they'd seal off the area, and then the body would be shipped to an RAF base, probably end up in America somewhere, I would imagine. And this guy, this SAS guy, he said he was in a group called Group 58 Security. That was this secret group. And he basically told this guy, or he met him twice on 2 occasions, and he took some personal photographs, this SAS guy. So he had, I think it was a couple, a 20-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl who'd been mutilated. They had the classic mutilation signs, and he showed this guy the photographs. So he was very, very freaked out by this. So he thought, well, somebody has shown me photographs of a dead body, I need to report this to the police, because he didn't know what to believe. So he went to South Wales Police, and then he was interviewed by CID officers, and he was told to come back the following day. When he went back the following day, he was told that those CID officers were on holiday to come back in 5 weeks. He went back in 5 weeks, he's told they were on sick leave, so they were just palming him off. So they got his information. Now, allegedly what then happened was the SAS guy got a bollocking off his superiors, and it caused friction between the guy who contacted me and the SAS guy. But the SAS guy gave some of his information, and I know that he gave the photographs to Tony Dodd, author of, because Tony Dodd was probably one of the main researchers in the UK on the subject. Now, I've tried to get, well, firstly, the guy who contacted me, I've tried to get him to go on camera about 3 times, and he's agreed to an interview, and then he's lost his bottle at the last minute each time. I even went all the way down to Wales to interview him, and then he lost his bottle again. That was a wasted journey. So, but Tony Dodd had these images of these mutilated bodies from Brecon Beacon, but we contacted his wife, and she said that she threw all of his research material out when he died. So it was like, we really wanted to get those images. Anyway, so, that's pretty scary stuff, and possibly points to why there is a cover-up over this particular issue. And I'm going to present quite a lot of evidence that A, the government know all about this, and B, that they're trying to hide it from us. Now, the only actual statement from government that we know of ever on this subject was in 1998, because BBC Manchester were doing a piece on it, and so therefore, you know, BBC Manchester got in touch with the government, and they've obviously thought, well, we've got to say something if the BBC were involved. And all they said was, the series of animal mutilations have been very distressing for the farmers involved, and the majority of these incidents have been reported to the police as very serious offences and are being dealt with them at present. As a result, it is not for the Ministry of Agriculture to pass comment on these incidents, as they are being handled by the relevant authorities. Now, after that point in time, there's been both media blackout and government blackout. No one's ever spoken about it publicly. But the incidents have continued right through, you know, from the 90s onwards to now. They're still happening now. And I mentioned Professor Tony Fremont, the pathologist that was helping these three guys who were doing the research. And he received letters from a chap called Kevin McClure. Now, I don't want to go into ufology too much, but there's a guy in ufology called Andy Roberts. Now, Andy Roberts basically is a UFO skeptic, and he writes books about, he basically tries to debunk what I would consider very tight, watertight UFO cases, and I believe that he's steered somehow by the intelligence agencies to do this, that he's actually, that's the job, although I can't prove that. Now, a very close friend of his is Kevin McClure, and he wrote this letter, he wrote 2 letters to Tony Fremont, basically trying to scare him off to stop doing this research for the APFU. And he says here that I would be grateful to know whether the University of Manchester is aware that your work is being used to argue for the reality of extraterrestrial intelligent entities which abduct animals, mutilate them, then return them to the fields where they were found. And then he goes on basically point after point trying to scare Fremont off from doing this research. Because obviously this is what perturbs the authorities, that if they've got a pathologist on their side, without him, you know, the group can just be passed off as a bunch of quacks. So this is why I don't believe that letter was just from, you know, Kevin McClure, a member of the public. I think he's been put up to write that letter.